Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Andrew McCormick. I had a year last year with plenty of high notes. Now, there were some rough spots too, but there were just so many things to be proud of. I had a really good curriculum, great coworkers, awesome students, and I had this one student in particular that really let me feel like a rock star. I had a special needs student that was such a joy to teach. I mean, this girl was amazing by what she would get into and be inspired by. She really let me feel like, finally after 11 years that I'd hit a home run with accommodations in the classroom. I'm happy to bring on a good friend and AOE writer, Abby Schukei, to talk about some strategies and successes in making accommodations for the needs of our diverse learners.
Hi, I'm Abby Schukei. I am a middle school art teacher in Omaha, Nebraska, and I feel that making accommodations for your students is really important because it can really transform the art making experience.
While Abby and I have our differences, most notably about tie-dyeing, Abby and I agree that making accommodations for the needs of all of our students can be really tricky. Now, Abby seems to really get it. She's got a great article on the Art of Ed about 5 great process-oriented projects that are really good to do with adaptive art classes. And she got it quick, too. I've been teaching a lot longer than she has, but it took me a really long time to learn some of this stuff. And, the reason is I think that because as art teachers, we can't say, well, here's the playbook. Here's what you do for this type of kid. And then you change the playbook when you get this type of kid. There really are no types. Just when you think you've learned a few tricks and making some good accommodations, a new student or class comes in with all sorts of new strengths and weaknesses. So as teachers, we really have to stay flexible and open. Many of us leave our undergrad programs feeling a little underprepared to tackle the full gamut of needs that our students might have. That's why the Art of Education's course, Reaching All Artists Through Differentiation, is so great. In this 3-credit class, you'll learn how to modify your curriculum for students with all sorts of needs, from special education modifications to ELP or ELL students. You'll walk away with a number of strategies and ideas to enhance and modify your lesson plans and craft assessments that are really targeted to your students' needs and abilities. Reaching All Artists Through Differentiation is a 3-credit course, and new sections start up at the beginning of this next month. So do yourself a favor and head on over to theartofed.com and check out this and all the other great courses under the Courses tab. So let's see if Abby and I can get over this deep disdain for each other's stance on tie-dyed shirts to see if we can talk some nuts and bolts accommodations. Hey, Abby, thanks for coming on to talk today.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
So, I've recently gotten to the point in the last couple of years of my teaching where I really felt like I was getting somewhere with my accommodations for students with diverse needs. And this year, I'm actually teaching a fully adaptive art class that's pretty unique. We've got kind of a unique twist on it. But I'm still what I would consider to be a work in progress. So, do you think that most art teachers out there, it takes us a while to get good at accommodations?
Yes, totally. That is something that I certainly, when I had to do my first adaptive art class, that I was like, holy smokes, what am I doing? So yes, I certainly think that it takes some time to kind of get into the groove with that.
So why is it that you think it takes us a while? Is it just because it's really tough, or like we're poorly prepared, or what is it?
Probably both. I think definitely we're poorly prepared when it comes to it. I know, like in my experience, in my art education program, there was like one sped class that I had to take, and it was like, you had to take it. And it was with all of the general ed teachers, nothing, art related at all. I don't really even remember anything about it, but it was just like, I didn't have any experience, no training at all. And I was just kind of like thrown into this situation, and I was like, I have no idea what I am doing. And I think another thing that goes along with that is it's the hard part about it is that it's not a one size fits all approach to this accommodation thing. It's just like each and every one of your students is different. You might come up with the best idea for one of your students, and it's not going to work for another one. So you kind of have to go back to the drawing board every single time you get a new student, a new situation. And so it is really challenging. And I think it just comes from not knowing what to expect because of your students, and because most of us probably don't have the training to do it.
You're right. I remember taking those classes in college, and it was like kind of more just like descriptive of different types of students. But right, you almost never had to even like plan a lesson plan and then like what would it look like. And even then, I mean, it's such an abstract concept to think about like, okay, well, 2 years from now, when I really have real students, I mean, it's all that training is kind of out the window. And really, I think the best training is just experience. But you had said that you had kind of gotten better at it. So did you kind of feel like you had a light bulb moment where things started to click for you? I mean, do you feel like was there a moment, was there maybe a paraeducator or a student where it all kind of came together?
Well, let me take you back to like my first week of being a teacher. So it's like my fourth day of ever of teaching. Okay. And at this time, I was teaching in elementary school, and I was seeing 1,000 students. I had 3 different buildings, and in this particular building, I was teaching art on a cart. And I'm told there wasn't a classroom teacher name on the list, and I was like, "What is this?" Like, I couldn't figure out what this class was that I was supposed to be doing. And they're like, "Well, this is going to be an adapted art class," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I had no idea what to do. Not a clue. And so, day 4, I go into this class. I get in there, and I probably spent more time trying to plan for this class than I did for any of my other like 50 sections of classes that I was teaching at that same time, first week. And I came in like guns blazing with this, I don't know, stupid shape lesson. Because I had no idea. And I just remember, like, I don't know what I expected the kids to do, but I walked in there and it was like a life skills class. And I don't know if I wanted the kids to trace these shapes or what, but the class was 50 minutes long.
Ooh.
And about 20 minutes into it, we were done.
Yeah.
And I was just like sitting there, and I was like looking at the paras, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I've never had an experience with that. So, I guess that was my light bulb moment of, oh my gosh, this is not going to be easy. But like, eventually I did kind of get into the groove of it a little bit. By the end of the first quarter, I was totally figuring it out. And then by the first year, I was like, all right, I'm good to go for next year. So, I mean, it took me that long, but I just had to go. I walked in the first day not having a clue what was going to happen. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because I was like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. I got to be ready to just go with it. Yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, I think, being thrown in just right away, it kind of forced you to learn it very quickly. I mean, my experience is a little different. I think, I'd have a couple students every year with some special needs who'd have associates with them. And sometimes my relationship and my working with the associates was really great, and we'd come up with ideas together. And sometimes it wasn't great. And I'd either have an associate who would really not help at all, or, even worse than that, on the other side of it is an associate who does everything for the kid. And you're just like, well, they didn't you got to find that happy medium where like you're helping, but that as the adult, you're not doing it just for them. So I felt like it took me longer because I only had a couple shots every year to kind of like get a little bit better and a little bit better. And then finally, like year 11, I was like, oh, like I had this one student and it was really great. And I mean, that girl is just an artist and she was amazing. And I was able to do like a lot of my similar like choice-based approaches with her, but just kind of approach it different. It was just a really wonderful experience. But I could go on and on about her, but I wanted to ask you like some sort of specific kind of overview things. Like, do you have some like specific go-to successful strategies that have really helped you out in working with students with special needs?
Yeah. So going back to that idea of like not having any of that training for that, in my pre-service times, but, my sister is actually a special education teacher. So I remember, after that first day experience, I was like, holy smokes, I don't know what to do. And so I've actually been able to use kind of some of her behavior strategies, because I feel like that's, one of the biggest things that you have a tendency to deal with in those types of situations. And so some of my favorite strategies to use is really incentive based. Because I know for the students that I've worked with, they are very, very, they're focused on what they want to do. And so, it comes down to figuring out what that student likes, what's their student interest, and then building an incentive off of that. So I have a couple of examples that really kind of show how I've been able to use that. I used to have this kid when I was in elementary school, he was very defiant and would hardly ever work. Like if you put the paint by him, he would throw it. And so it was really, really a battle each and every time. So we came up with this system. He really was interested in money. So we had this little Velcro system where, we'd set a timer. And each time that if he was able to work on his art project for 5 minutes, we'd move a coin over. And after he got 4 coins down, he got to have his prize or his incentive. And that was usually 10 minutes of iPad time, or he would always carry around a phone book with him. Mm-hmm. And so he would just spend that 10 minutes looking at his phone book. And then after that time, then we'd go back to it and start it over again. So that instructional strategy is having the visual reminder and the timer of the sound. He knew that, hey, in this amount of time, if I work on my art project, I'll be able to, get my reward. Mm-hmm. So that's been a really good strategy. I also have had another kind of a similar one, where I had a student who had Down syndrome, and he was very behaviorally defiant, but there were like 3 things that he really liked. He liked cars, he liked rap music, he liked me, but he hated art. And it was like pulling teeth. So we kind of did something similar with him, whereas like we took those interests, and I happened to have this car book in my room. So, and this was in an 8th grade setting. So I had him every single day for an entire year. And he would come in, and while kids were doing their bell work, he would come in and he would go find that car book, and he would sit down, and that was kind of his bell work that he would do. And then as I was giving some of the instructions to the other class, he would kind of wait and do that. And then once I had gotten done with the other classes, the other students in the inclusive setting, we'd get going with his project. And the reward for him at the end of the day was if he was able to do everything, the required work that I had put out for him that day, he would be able to listen to his favorite rapper, and we'd get a YouTube video up. He'd put his headphones in, and boy, would he would listen to some Rick Ross, and that is what did it for him. So
it's so funny that you bring that up, because you know what you said a bit ago about how every student's different. I bet the Rick Ross doesn't work for everybody. That's not like a blanket strategy that'll just work for every student.
No way. This was a special situation. Yeah. I don't know that there's any other student I would probably do that for, but man, it works every day. And I think I remember the first day where it was like, he's walking out of the room and he's like, no Rick Ross. And I was like, well, you didn't do your stuff. And like, after that, I think we got Rick Ross just about every day.
Oh, that's awesome. So those both sound like kind of inclusive environments. So I want you to think about, a class that's a little different from that. So not just like, a classroom with 1 or 2 special needs students and then the rest of your class, but a class that's just full on. Everyone in there has some sort of spectrum of diverse needs. How does that look and feel different for you and your history and your background?
So I actually started out that first experience that I had was in just an adapted art room. So I actually would have 20 severe and profound students. So most of these students were life skills based. Most of them, my first experiences with them were in kind of a nonverbal setting, and very much generally there maybe be, of the 20 students in the room, there'd probably be at least 5 that were wheelchair bound and had some very, very limited mobility in some of that regard. So there's definitely a huge difference between that inclusive setting and the full out working with those life skills or in that adaptive art setting. And I think part of the reason is it's because it is a lot more work. In an inclusive setting, you can just, adapt what you're doing, accommodate in that way, by making a few tweaks here and there. You don't necessarily have to start from scratch every single time. But with these students in this full adaptive art setting, I probably spend the amount of prep that goes into it is insane. Like I probably spend so much more time preparing for that, for what we're probably going to get through in like 30 minutes, even though it might take me 2 hours to plan for. It's just a lot more time.
Yeah.
I don't know. Some of the things that I like, that are different about that is just knowing each student in there has a severe different need or a different something else that they can or cannot do. And one of the things that I think that, I guess one of my pieces of advice that I would say to people is in a setting like that is to stay away from scissors. It is going to be the nightmare. It is awful.
Well, so I got to share a little bit about a class that I teach right now, which is called Peer Art, which is an adaptive art class. And I can in no way, shape, or form take any credit for this idea, but I really, really like it. And just earlier this fall, I was at the Art Educators of Iowa conference, and I talked about this student that I had last year at my former job. And then we kind of transitioned into this year in some work that I'm doing. And like I said, the name of the class is called Peer Art. And the way that it works is I have anywhere between 10 and 12 severe and profound students in that class. And then they are partnered up with a peer, a student, full functioning, fully abled student who is giving up of a study hall, or maybe they sign up for that class on their own. But a lot of them had a study hall and then they come down instead for this. And then they work one-on-one with that severe and profound friend that they've been partnered up with, which I think is really awesome. So I kind of roll out an idea, a curriculum, a project, really more to the peers, and then they go and work with their friend kind of one-on-one, and we try to find happy mediums of what sort of sensory projects are the severe and profound students enticed by. So maybe we put some smells of, an aroma in the paint, or we've done a lot of like just touching sponges that have some paint on it, or things that are wet, or crumpling up paper. So just the sound, the feel, the texture of this stuff. And it's really been a lot of fun, and it's been really good. And one of the things I can echo is that it really is a lot of work, and it takes us about 25 minutes to get a project done. And then it's just like, boom, we're done. Because it's not really, I'm trying to find this balancing act where it's not really artwork that the student who's helping out would take home and say like, this is my own artwork, I'm creating it. It's more like, what can they do together with the sort of skills that they have? So in a lot of ways, I'm doing kind of like a second and third grade type of level curriculum, because then I know that everyone can kind of do it and get into it. And it's very, very process oriented, and it's been really great. And I just really dig it.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I think one of those things, just the peer relationship between it, that's super cool. And it's really brings into that notion that art is an experience. Right. And it's not necessarily about the product, but more about what, that tactile and those sensory things.
And, when we get done early, then they just kind of chat about things, and it's good for the students to kind of get out of their special ed classroom, because they do spend a lot of their time in there. And they're kind of talking, and it's just really great. But yeah, I know what you mean, that it is a lot of work, but man, it's really taught me a lot about some things, and we'll kind of get to that at the end. That's kind of like the last question I want to ask you, kind of how this whole thing comes full circle. But I also kind of wanted to ask you, because I know those fully adaptive classes can be really challenging for people. Do you have any like go-to projects or materials, or adaptive sort of materials that you found that people out there could get or use that could make their experience a little bit better?
Yeah. Well, first off, going for materials. Unfortunately, the messier the material, the better I think that students are able to use it, especially if there's a wide range of accommodations that are needed. So probably almost every single project we do involves paint, whether that be some good old fashioned tempera paint that smells up the room, or I actually really like to use liquid watercolor with them. But I would probably say generally most of the time we're going to use paint because I don't like messing with paint trays and all of that. So some painted paper really goes a long way. Just putting it right on the paper, and then using some texture tools to create lots of awesome textures in that. And then I actually use a lot of stencils, just oak tag stencils or cardstock to, students can really manipulate those things a lot. But yeah, I think one of the reasons that I really like to use paint is because everything else, like oil pastels and things are hard for students to hold a lot of the time. Sure. Like they're not big enough unless there was like a giant oil. Somebody needs to invent that, like a long oil pastel. Because everything else is just so hard for them to hold as far as their motor skills go. So I actually use, not only large paintbrushes, but sometimes we'll use cleaning supplies. Like we have one of my favorite brush that students like to use is like a toilet cleaner wand. Right. Because it's easy for them to manipulate and move.
Right. And anything that you can kind of slide through it. So big giant sponges or like big old like monster trucks with the wheels where they can slide that along and it makes the texture. All that stuff is like really, really fun. And it is easy for them to hold. One of the things that I had in my room was a series of large paintbrushes that then had been kind of shoved into a tennis ball and then hot glued into place. So then the students, if they could hold a tennis ball, which is, pretty big, then they can kind of manipulate the end of the brush. So there are all sorts of like sort of DIY hacks out there. If you're creative to think about like, okay, could I take a pool noodle and could I attach, something to a pool noodle? Could I turn a pool noodle into like a texture rolling pin? And that's a little bit bigger and easier than some other things. So, my advice to people would be like kind of be creative with what you have out there that you could use that is easier to grab, easier to manipulate.
Totally. I actually use oven mitts and hot glue the paintbrush into those because I used to have a student that would throw the brushes all the time. So that really helped us out. So yeah, those DIY things can really be helpful.
Yeah. So, hey, I want to ask you one kind of final question because this is something I kind of realized last year when I really felt like I had just like a home run experience with a student who had diverse needs. I felt like I got to a point where because of what she was teaching me and the accommodations I was making, it was actually benefiting like all of the students in my class. Cause I kind of thought about like, okay, if she needs this accommodation or needs it explained a different way or modified, maybe I could make that modification like for all the students and they actually benefited from it too. I mean, have you ever had that moment and have you kind of seen that happen where everyone is benefiting from you making good accommodations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the reasons why, I can relate to that feeling that you've explained is because when you're learning to make accommodations for students, whether they are a student that has special needs or just a student in your general classrooms, making those accommodations forces you to identify the strengths and needs of all of your students, no matter who they are. So that means that you have to get to know your students, and doing that is only going to benefit the art making experience for them.
Yeah. Well, Abby, thanks so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this talk. And when I knew I wanted to do a show about this, I knew you were like the greatest person to talk to. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, wow. Thanks.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks.
All right. So thanks to Abby for coming on. Man, I am a little bit jealous of her sink or swim initiation that she went through. I wonder if I'd had that experience like, she had, that I might have shaved off a few years of struggling to make good accommodations for diverse learners. It's not that I was horrible. Sometimes I've had some great successes, and sometimes it was a little tricky to build that great relationship with the associate educators. Or maybe I kind of hit or miss on really making good accommodations. But going back to that student that really showed me how to run better accommodations, she really got me falling in love with the idea of differentiation. So many times I saw firsthand how making good accommodations for her, whether it was new materials, new ideas, or tweaking a project a little bit here or there, it really benefited all of my students. And maybe you stumble across a technique that's more appropriate for your diverse students, and then that's going to translate directly into all your classes. But I think even more important than that instance is that all students benefit when their teacher is thinking deeply and creatively about student learning. Art Ed Radio is developed, produced, and supported by the Art of Education with audio engineering by Michael Crocker. So usually this is the time when I do a little plug for the show, tell you guys to write a review or subscribe to the mailing list. I'm not going to do that today. Instead, I want to say to all you fellow teachers out there, thank you. You have an awesome job, but it is a tough one. And I know at times it can be a little thankless, but I know that I wouldn't be where I am today doing what I love and fulfilling my passions were it not for all the wonderful teachers out there who have graced my life. I recently lost a high school teacher that made a really big impact in my life. Miss Thomas was a tough as nails teacher who really didn't take any crap from anyone. I'd like to say she didn't suffer no fools. She was also warm as hell and could really make you feel like $1,000,000. I can hear her words come out of my mouth when I kind of lay into a kid for some foolish behavior with sarcasm, honesty, compassion, and love. So keep up the good work, everyone. What you do matters.